They said she wasn't even worth $5, but a solitary rancher took her in and treated her as though she were royalty before we ride into the tale. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Broken Spur was the kind of place folks drifted to when they had nowhere else to turn. It wasn't really a town anymore, just a few buildings slumped on their foundations, dust thick beneath the eaves, faces that never asked questions. The wind swept across the flats without pause, cold and raw, carrying grit that stung the skin. Jack Hollister never came here unless he had no choice, and today he did. He guided the wagon's slow reins in one hand, the other resting near the rifle laid on the seat. The road was rutted and frozen scraps of old snow lingering in the low spots. Each breath poured out white in the chill air. The sun was sinking. He figured if he traded for mule grain and a block of salt fast enough, he could be home before night swallowed the land. 3 days had gone by without him speaking to another soul, and that suited him fine. Jack wasn't the kind to waste words anymore. At 35, he had seen more loss than men twice his years, 2 brothers and a father gone to a bloody land quarrel. He watched the guilty walk away like it meant nothing. Since then, he kept to himself, tending his modest spread west of the ridge, caring for his stock eyes lowered whenever he had to ride into town. That was the plan again. Trade hides, say as little as possible, get back before the next storm rolled in. But near the depot, a sagging shack with a half-collapsed platform, something under the awning, made him pull the mule to a stop. At first it looked like rags tossed aside. Then he saw the shape of a person. Jack climbed down, slow boots crunching frost. There she lay, curled tight knees to her chest, unmoving. Her skin, pale lips cracked from the cold. A torn prairie dress hung open at the neckline, one shoulder bare, the corset beneath ripped and showing more than it should. Dirt and bruises stained her legs, feet bare against the frozen boards. Her long hair covered her face, tangled and matted. She was breathing shallow and fragile, no shoes, no bag, no cloak, just scraps and skin. Jack's jaw set hard. He stared a moment, knowing she didn't belong here, knowing no one in Broken Spur would step out to help. He glanced at the depot door. Shut tight. He could have walked past. He had sworn a dozen times not to get tangled up with anyone again. Let the world burn itself down. It had taken enough already. But before his mind could argue, his body was moving. He shrugged off his coat and stepped forward. The crunch of his boots made her flinch. Her eyes cracked open, green and weary beneath grime. She didn't beg. She didn't speak. "You hungry?" he asked low. The faintest nod. He eased the coat over her, careful not to startle her more. She smelled of pine smoke and long nights in the open. "I got a place," he said simply. Fire. Food. No one else. No answer, but no resistance either, when he slid an arm behind her shoulders and another beneath her knees. She sagged against him, heavier than she looked. Her fingers clutched the coat tighter. He lifted her into the wagon, tucked an old wool blanket around her, and climbed back onto the bench. Without another word, he turned the team toward the hills. The mule snorted, eager to leave that town behind. As they passed, Jack caught sight of Emmett Crowley, the station clerk, peering out from the window. The man didn't wave, didn't move to open the door. Nobody had bothered to cover her. Nobody asked a thing. They'd left her there like a piece of trash. The road back was slow, the wind sharp, the sun dropping behind the hills. Jack kept glancing over his shoulder, listening for the shallow sound of her breathing under the blanket. She was alive. That was all that mattered. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, didn't need to. She'd been left out in the cold, half-clothed and dying, and no one else had stopped. That was enough for him. When his cabin finally came into view, smoke curling from the chimney and drifts of snow piled high along the porch, something pulled tight in his chest. Not fear, not duty. Something simpler. She needed someone, and for now that someone was Jack Hollister. The wagon groaned as it halted beside the cabin just after sundown. The sky had turned black, quick storm clouds rolling over the peaks, heavy with more snow. Jack Hollister climbed down stiffly, bones aching, boots caked with mud. He circled around and lifted the woman into his arms again. She didn't wake, but she shifted faintly, clinging tighter to the edge of his coat. Her skin carried a trace of warmth under the fabric, but not near enough. The cabin door opened with a long creak. Jack kicked it shut with the heel of his boot. The fire in the hearth was little more than coals, but the heat was enough to put color back in her face after a few minutes. He carried her to the narrow cot along the wall and set her down gentle. She stayed curled tight, silent. He left her be, poured water into a tin pot, and set it over the flames. His movements were steady, unhurried. He pulled a heavy wool blanket from its hook, draped it across her, and set a tin cup on the table to wait for the water. Her eyes cracked open now, tracking him across the room, though she didn't speak. Jack said nothing either. The cabin was plain but solid rough floors, a scarred table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with beans and salt, a stovetop beside the hearth. Just what a man needed to make it through. She lay still, breath shallow. In the lamplight, he saw her better lips split at the corners, a cheek swollen from an old bruise, her dress torn wide at the neckline and barely hanging on. Ribbons of fabric exposed her thighs. Beneath the dirt, her skin looked soft, her figure clear even through ruin. He turned away and stirred the pot. When the water steamed, he added dried beef and oats, working the spoon slow. Simple fare, but it would warm her. Her voice rasped, almost broken. "Is this your place?" He nodded, eyes still on the pot. "Yeah." She studied him in silence. When he brought her the cup, her hands trembled, reaching for it. He steadied it until she drank, cautious eyes never leaving his face. "You live alone?" she asked. "Yes." She didn't pry, didn't ask if he liked company, only nodded and looked back at the fire. Jack went to the chest by the wall, pulled out a clean undershirt and a long wool sock, set them on the cot. "That's what I've got. Your dress won't hold." She gave no reply. He folded his arms, sat at the table. After a minute, she whispered, "You're going to ask what happened to me?" "No." His answer fell heavy, but not cruel. Silence stretched like a wall between them. She frowned faintly. "Why not? Figure if you want to tell it, you will." Her eyes lowered, then lifted with a small nod, as though something settled inside her. Time passed. The fire cracked, the wind moaned over the roof. She raised the cup again, steadier now. Jack opened a cabinet, pulled another blanket, and offered it. She studied him. He said simply, "You can have the bed. I'll take the chair." Her brow creased with surprise. She nodded, pulled the blanket close, wrapped in his coat as well. "You don't know me," she murmured. "Don't need to," Jack replied. Her gaze held his, not searching, only checking if he meant it. He did. By the time the fire dimmed and the embers glowed red, she was asleep, curled toward the wall. His coat had slipped from her shoulder. Jack eased it back over her skin and turned away. He sat in the chair by the door, eyes on the flames, listening. He didn't know her name, didn't know if she'd be here come morning. But tonight, she was under his roof, and nobody was going to harm her. The fire was nearly out. when Jack stirred in the chair. His neck ached, arms stiff from the cold creeping in. A dim gray light leaked through the shutters, promising more snow. He stayed still a moment, just listening. No sound from the cot. He rose, slow joints cracking, and looked over. She was there, breathing soft beneath the blankets, one leg uncovered, bruises faint on her pale calf. His coat had slipped again. Her dress shifted low across her chest. Jack turned his eyes aside, drew the blanket over her, and moved back to the hearth. He stacked wood, stirred the flames, filled the kettle, and set it on the iron grate. Then he stepped outside to break the ice at the trough. The cold struck him hard, numbing his hands and face, but he worked quick with the axe. The horses whickered softly from the lean-to. He fed them, checked their hooves with steady hands. When he came back in, she was upright now, shoulders hunched, still wrapped in his coat, eyes on him as he closed the door. She pushed her hair back from her face eyes, following Jack Hollister as he stepped inside. "Used to folks walking away," she rasped, voice rough from sleep and cold. He gave a short nod. "Yeah." She glanced toward the door, then at the stove. "Figured you'd be gone come first light." "I live here," he answered, setting down the bucket. "Ain't got anywhere else to be." She turned her gaze aside. Her fingers picked at the torn seam along her collar, tracing up to her neck, like she'd only just realized how much skin was showing. She tugged his coat tighter around herself. Her face stayed blank, but the motion wasn't casual. It was guarded. Jack let it pass. He poured hot water into 2 tin mugs, dropped coffee grounds in, and slid one across to her. She held it with both hands, warming her fingers against the metal eyes, avoiding his. He sat across the table, waiting. "Clara May," she said at last. "That's my name." "Jack," he replied simply. She gave a faint nod. "Where I came from, a name didn't mean much. Folks treated me like I was worth less than a calf." "You came in out of the cold barefoot and near dead," Jack said. "That's enough for now." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. She studied him harder this time, less afraid. "I'd been staying with my uncle, Reverend Silas Boone. He owed money. Figured I could pay some of it off, same as cattle or grain. I left before he could." Jack said nothing, just kept his steady gaze on her. She searched his face, bracing for judgment. When none came, her voice lowered. "He told them I was nothing. Said I wasn't even worth $5. Folks believed him." "You believe him?" Jack asked. Lines creased her forehead. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not anymore. Not after last night." He didn't answer. Didn't need to. She drank again, slower, letting the warmth spread back through her. Her eyes wandered toward the corner where his shirts sat folded in a wooden crate. One had been pulled loose. She must have noticed it the night before when he offered her clean clothes. "That shirt looks like it's coming apart," she said. "You don't have to." "I want to." She cut in firmer than before. Not defiant, but clear, like it mattered that she could give something back. He gave a short nod. "All right." The morning moved on in small steps. She tried standing but wavered, one leg shaky. Jack offered his hand, but she waved him off, bracing against the wall. Pride or just survival. Either way, he respected it. Later, she bathed behind a blanket strung by the stove. Jack kept his eyes on the fire, though he noticed the damp footprints she left on the floor, light, small. She wore the long undershirt he'd given her tied with cord at the waist. That evening, she helped chop vegetables for stew. Her hands trembled on the knife, but she didn't complain. Jack watched from across the table. Every movement was careful, deliberate, as if she were relearning the right to take up space. "You don't talk much," she said suddenly, not looking up. "I say what needs saying." She let out a breath, half weary, half amused. I like that. They ate in silence while the fire cracked and the wind moaned outside. When the bowls were empty, she cleared them without being asked. Before bedding down, she lingered near the cot, eyes catching his. You didn't ask what they did to me, she said. I don't need to know unless you want to tell me. Her jaw tightened like she was holding back. Then she nodded almost as if promising herself. Not tonight. All right. She lay down, pulled the blanket over her shoulder, and turned toward the wall. Jack settled back in the chair, boots crossed at the ankles, eyes on the fire. He wasn't sure what she'd endured, but she was safe here. That was enough. And for the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel so hollow. Days slipped by slow after that winter gray and silent. Snow deepened, sealing off the trail to Broken Spur, and Jack didn't mind. He had stores enough firewood stacked and no reason to ride back into town. His life had been built on being left alone. Until now. Inside the cabin, something shifted. He saw it in small things. Clara May folded not just one shirt, but all of them, stacking them neat in the crate. She swept the floor with a branch broom, wiped soot from the hearth. Jack didn't speak on it, but he noticed. Her bruises faded her steps steadier. Her cheeks found color again. She ate more. Most days she wore his long undershirt, belted at the waist. It barely reached her knees, and when she bent at the stove, the fabric pulled across her figure or slid high on her thighs. He tried not to look. Sometimes he failed. She knew, but she never said a word. They found a rhythm without planning. He handed her the knife to cut potatoes. She passed him kindling without being asked. She washed the tin cups. He stacked them away. Quiet, natural, like a routine built from nothing. One morning, Jack came back from the horses and found her by the window. Sunlight caught her face, her hair loose and brushed clean, falling over her shoulders. She'd washed it the night before, dried it by the fire. Now it framed her like a curtain. She turned when she heard the door. You always keep to yourself like this? Clara May Whitlow asked. Jack Hollister shrugged out of his coat, hung it on the nail by the door. Mostly. No wife, no. Ever think about it? He paused at the stove, the fire snapping in the grate behind him. I used to. She didn't press. Just nodded as if she understood more than she let on. Maybe she did. She poured 2 mugs of coffee, the steam curling into the air, and handed him one. Her fingers brushed his when she passed it over. Not deliberate, but not entirely by accident either. They sat across from each other at the table. Silence heavy, but warm, not hollow. Later, as the sun slid behind the ridge, Clara May asked if she could step outside. Jack studied her a long moment. It's bitter cold. I'll be quick. He gave her his boots, far too big, but she tied them with twine and wrapped rags around her ankles to keep them from slipping. She moved slow, arms crossed inside his coat, circling the yard, as though testing her strength. Jack stood at the window, arms folded, watching. She paused by the fence, leaned on the top rail, and looked toward the trees. Her breath puffed, white hair blowing in the wind. When she came back in, cheeks flushed, she peeled off the rags and smiled faintly. Still breathing, she said. Jack gave a single nod. That's something. That night, as they sat by the fire, she asked what he had been expecting. Why are you really out here alone? He didn't answer right away, only stared into the flames. My folks were ranchers, he said at last. Had a spread east of here big enough for men to fight over. She waited. Neighbor wanted it, made a deal with a mining outfit. Pa wouldn't sell, turned mean, quick. Guns came in the night, burned the barn, poisoned the well. One night I came back from riding range and his jaw clenched. All I found was silence. Thomas and Benjamin gone. Pa too. Only thing left standing was the house. Clara May didn't speak. She just reached across the table, her fingers resting light on his hand. He didn't pull away. I left, Jack said quietly. Didn't look back. You never went after them. Law wasn't my kind of man, he answered. And I was done bleeding for other folks' greed. She let that sink in, then asked, Ever wish you'd stayed in town? Started over? He looked at her. Firelight softened her face, her body wrapped in his coat. Her lips cracked but full, her eyes steady, not pitying something else. Respect. I don't know, he admitted. Never thought it would matter. Maybe it still does. She rose, slow stepped toward the hearth, and bent to stir the pot. The coat slipped from one shoulder, showing the soft curve of bare skin. She didn't pull it back. Jack swallowed hard and turned his eyes away. But the air between them had changed. This wasn't just about offering shelter anymore, and she wasn't just passing through. No more words were spoken that night. But when she lay down, she didn't turn her back to the wall. And when Jack settled by the fire, he stayed closer this time, listening to the sound of her steady breathing. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man cut off from the world. And Clara May Whitlow no longer seemed like something discarded and forgotten. The days rolled on slow gray snow, piling higher against the cabin, closing off the trail to Broken Spur. Jack didn't mind. He had supplies enough, wood enough, and no reason to ride into town. His life had been built on solitude. But now inside these walls, something was shifting. He saw it in the small things. Clara May folded not just one shirt, but every one he owned, stacking them neatly in the crate. She swept the floor each morning without being asked, wiped soot from the hearth. Jack said nothing, but he noticed. Her bruises faded her hands steadier each day. Her cheeks filled with color. She ate more. She still wore his long undershirt belted at the waist. It barely reached her knees, and when she leaned over the hearth or bent to the kettle, the fabric stretched and rose. Jack tried not to look. Sometimes he failed. She knew, but never mentioned it. They moved around each other with an easy rhythm, him handing her a knife for potatoes, her passing him kindling without a word. She washed the cups, he stacked them. No plan, but a routine formed all the same. One morning, Jack came in from tending the horses and found her at the window. Sunlight caught her face. Her hair hung loose over her shoulders, brushed clean, dried by the fire the night before. She turned when the door creaked. They sat across from one another at the table, the quiet between them, not hollow, but alive. Later, when the sun dipped low behind the ridge, Clara May Whitlow asked if she could step outside. Jack Hollister studied her for a beat. It's cold. I'll be quick, she promised. He handed her his boots, far too big, but she tied them with twine and wrapped rags around her ankles to keep them from sliding. She moved slow arms folded beneath his coat, circling the yard like she was testing her legs. Jack watched through the window, arms crossed. She stopped at the fence, leaning against the rail, her breath rising in frosted puffs, hair shifting in the winter breeze. When she came back in cheeks glowing red, she tugged off the rags and gave a faint smile. Still alive, she whispered. Jack nodded once. That's something. That evening by the fire, she finally asked the question he knew was waiting. Why are you really out here alone? He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the flames. My folks were ranchers, he said at last. Had a spread east of here, land worth fighting over. She waited. Neighbor wanted it bad. Cut a deal with a mining outfit. Pa wouldn't sell. They came hard. Burned the barn, poisoned the well. One night I rode back from the range and found nothing left but silence. Thomas and Benjamin. My father, too. All gone. Only the house still standing. His jaw tightened. Clara May didn't speak, just reached out and laid her fingers softly over his hand. He didn't pull away. I left, Jack said low. Didn't look back. You never went after them. Law wasn't my kind of man, he answered, and I was done bleeding for other people's greed. She let that settle before asking, Ever wish you'd stayed in town? Started over. He looked at her. The fire painted her face in gold, her body wrapped in his coat. Her lips were dry, but full, her eyes steady, not pitying something deeper. Respect. I don't know, he said finally. Never thought it mattered. Maybe it still does. She rose slowly, moved to the hearth, and bent to stir the pot. The coat slipped off one shoulder, revealing the gentle slope of bare skin. She didn't pull it back. Jack swallowed hard and looked away, but something had shifted. The air between them held weight unspoken, but certain. He wasn't just offering shelter anymore, and she wasn't just passing through. They said no more that night, but when she lay down, she didn't turn her back to the wall. And he didn't sleep in the chair. He sat closer to the fire, only a few feet from her, watching the flames, until his eyes gave in, listening to her breathing steady, warm. For the first time in years, Jack Hollister didn't feel like a man living alone. And Clara May Whitlow no longer felt like something left behind. The morning broke quiet and white, a fresh blanket of snow covering the land, half burying the woodpile. Jack woke early, as always, but didn't rise at once. He sat on the edge of the chair, staring at the embers, listening to the soft rhythm of Clara May's breathing from the cot. She had slept facing him again. No wall between them this time. Her face was different in rest, less guarded, almost like the woman she'd been before life turned cruel. The bruises along her jaw had faded, her lips no longer cracked. Color crept back into her skin. When she stirred, he crossed to the stove kettle, rattling, as he poured in water, the tin pan scraping the bottom of the bean jar. Outside, the wind hadn't risen yet, but by midday it would. He'd need to split kindling, check the lean-to roof, maybe move the hens closer if the weather worsened. He wondered if she'd stay inside this time. She hated feeling idle. Behind him, she sat up. He didn't turn. Coffee's heating, he said flat. She rubbed her hands across her face and sighed. Dreamed I was back in Carson. Then I woke to beans on the fire. That's either comfort or disappointment. Jack glanced back now. She sat wrapped in the blanket, brushing her hair away with her fingers. The undershirt he'd given her had slipped down one shoulder again, bearing the curve of her chest. The thin cotton stretched across her form, leaving little to hide. She seemed unbothered, or maybe too used to clothes that failed her. He looked away quickly. Your shirt, she said softly, noticing. Better than the dress, but it's still tight. You got anything else? I've got a few things. Men's clothes. I'll make do. After breakfast, she swept the floor, retied the blanket across the drafty window. Her hands moved quick and quiet. Jack pulled on his coat and stepped outside. She didn't trail him at first, but when Jack Hollister came back with an armful of kindling, Clara May Whitlow was standing on the porch, wrapped in his old coat, his boots on her feet once more. I'm not staying inside all day, she said. You don't have to, he replied, passing half the wood into her arms. She carried it inside like she'd been doing it her whole life. By noon, the wind had picked up scattering ash from the hearthstones. Jack sat at the table, sanding down the handle of a worn shovel. Clara May leaned across from him, watching. You fix everything yourself mostly. No one ever helps. He didn't look up. No. You mind if I do? His hand stilled, then continued. You can. She smiled faintly, more to herself than to him. That afternoon, as the storm roared outside, they moved the hens. She held the crate steady while he scooped the birds in. One pecked his boot, and she laughed out loud, a sharp, bright sound that was real and unguarded. Back inside, they dried off by the fire. She sat cross-legged on the floor, rubbing her arms. Her undershirt had soaked through beneath the coat, clinging to her skin, tracing the full curve of her breast and hips as she shifted. Jack noticed. She caught him noticing. You don't have to pretend not to look, Jack, she said quietly, without accusation. He didn't lie. I look because I'm a man, not because I expect anything. Her eyes softened. Pulling the blanket close, she moved to sit by the hearth facing him. That's why I'm still here, she said. He gave a slow nod. The fire crackled between them steady. They stayed like that, listening to the storm beat the roof. Later, while she scrubbed their bowls, Jack came up behind her to hang the kettle. His arm brushed her back. Her breath hitched, but she didn't move away. Jack, she said, voice low. He looked down. She turned to face him close now, eyes searching his. You don't look at me like the others did. Not like I'm something broken. You're not what they said you were, he told her simply. Her wet hand lifted tentative, and she kissed him. It was soft. Careful, her lips brushed his like she wasn't sure it was allowed, as though waiting to be shoved back. He didn't. His hand steadied at her waist, his mouth meeting hers with restraint, but no hesitation. He kissed like a man who hadn't in years, but hadn't forgotten how. When she pulled away, her cheeks were flushed. She said nothing more, just dried her hands, and went to the cot. Jack stood rooted, staring at the firelight where she had been. Nothing was spoken of tomorrow, or what they meant now, but something had shifted, plain and deliberate. Neither tried to stop it. That night the wind clawed at the corners of the cabin, rattling the boards, but the fire held stones glowing steady. Between Jack Hollister and Clara May Whitlow, there was a stillness. Not silence, stillness. Jack sat at the table, hands folded in his lap, staring at the flames without seeing. His lips still tingled from her kiss. It had been brief, but it lingered. Her hand had rested on his chest before she pulled back, hesitant, yet wanting. She had gone to the cot without shame, only quiet. He didn't move for near an hour, boots planted on the worn floorboards, listening to the roof creak under the storm. He knew he ought to check the latch on the lean-to, see to the hens again, but he stayed put. He could tell she was still awake. Her breathing wasn't the rhythm of sleep. When he rose, it wasn't to step outside. He poured hot water into a basin, set it on the table, and laid out a folded cloth. Clara May turned slightly. What are you doing? Your hands were red from the cold earlier, he said. Figured they hurt. Her gaze fell. They do. Come here. She hesitated, then slipped from the cot. The blanket around her shoulders dropped, baring her thighs beneath the hem of his undershirt. She crossed slowly and sat opposite him, firelight tracing her collarbone and the soft pull of fabric across her chest. He dipped the cloth into the warm water, wrung it out, and held out his hand. She laid hers on the table, palms up, wrists light. He pressed the cloth against them gently. She flinched, then eased, watching his face as he rubbed slow, circular strokes. No one's ever done that, she whispered. What? Cared for me without expecting something after. He said nothing, just worked in silence. When he finished, he dried her hands carefully, setting the cloth aside. She didn't pull away. I've been waiting, she said softly. Since the station. Wondering when you'd want me the same way everyone else did. His brow furrowed. You think that's what this is? She met his eyes. No. That's why it's harder. The fire cracked. The wind slammed the walls. Inside, it was quiet. Jack stood. She watched him come around the table, slow, deliberate. He stopped in front of her, close enough she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes. I don't take what ain't offered, he said. Her breath caught. What if it is? His jaw tightened. Then I want you to know you don't owe me that, just to keep this roof. I know, she answered. That's why I'm offering it. He stayed still a long moment, then nodded once. All right. She stood too. He stepped aside, letting her pass, but she didn't go far. She stopped by the cot, turned back, eyes fixed on him. He moved toward her, slow, steady. When he reached her, she gripped the front of his shirt lightly, searching his face one last time, making sure. Jack Hollister leaned down and kissed Clara May Whitlow. Not the quick brush from before, not a show of restraint. This one was steady, warm, her mouth opening slowly beneath his, her body pressing into him like she had been waiting years for the chance. His hand stayed firm at her waist before sliding up her back. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. When she stepped back, she reached down, tugged the cord at her waist, and let his undershirt fall from her shoulders. She stood before him, bare, unashamed, her curves soft and full in the glow of the fire. The bruises that once marred her skin had faded. Her body carried the marks of hardship, but it was hers, and she held her head high in it. Jack looked at her without hurry, without hunger, just reverence. Then he stripped off his shirt. They came together like two people already familiar with each other's rhythm. Her hands roamed his chest, rough with scars and sun-darkened skin. His fingers traced the line of her back down to her hips. When they laid down, it was unhurried, deliberate. Her breath caught as he entered her, their bodies fitting with a tenderness born of patience. She clung to him not in fear, but in need. His mouth trailed along her neck, her chest the hollow at her collarbone. A sharp gasp escaped her, startled, before she buried her face against his shoulder. There was no fumbling, no rush, just the slow opening of something long denied. Later she rested her head on his chest, his arm circling her. The fire glowed low. Her fingers traced a scar beneath his ribs. What was this one from? She asked softly. Barbed wire. Years back. She nodded like she understood. You ever think about leaving this place? He shook his head. Not until now. Her smile was sleepy, her eyes heavy. He kissed the top of her head. That night, Jack Hollister didn't dream of the past. And for the first time, Clara May Whitlow didn't wake afraid. By the time the next snow fell, they no longer circled one another. Jack woke with Clara May's leg tangled over his, her breath warm against his chest. The fire was down to embers, blankets pulled high. He stayed still, staring at the rafters, feeling the weight of her beside him. Not a burden, but a presence. Something steady. She stirred, lifting her head to look at him. Her brown hair lay tousled across her shoulder, the blanket slipping low, bearing the curve of her breast. The way she looked at him had changed. The caution was still there, but the fear was gone. You always up before dawn? She asked, her voice husky from sleep. Comes with the life, he said. She reached out, brushed his jawline with her fingers. I could get used to waking up like this. He kissed her slow, then rose to dress. She stayed under the covers, watching him silently, as he pulled on his shirt, his boots, and finally reached for his coat. You going to town today? She asked. No, he said, turning toward her. Just checking the fence line. Storm cracked one of the rails. She nodded. "I'll start bread. We're nearly out." He paused. "You don't need to." "I know," she said. "I want to." He didn't argue. Outside, the sky was sharp blue snow crunching underfoot like glass. He worked the fence for hours, body steady mind, drifting back to her, her hands kneading dough, the low, tuneless hum she'd started making in the mornings. When he returned near midday, he stopped before the porch. Clara May was outside near the coop, wrapped in a wool blanket, boots half-laced. A torn dress hung drying on the rail. She wore another of his shirts belted snug at the waist, riding high on her thighs. The wind blew her hair into her face as she laughed, laughing at a hen that had slipped free and was pecking at her boots. Jack stood watching just for a moment. She caught him staring. What she called. "Nothing," he said, stepping forward. "Just never seen you laugh like that." "It's new," she replied. "Don't ruin it." Inside, bread was rising, the cabin filled with the smell of flour and ash. She poured him coffee. He peeled off his coat. They sat at the table like they had done it for years. After a long silence, she said, "I've been thinking." He looked up. "About what comes next?" Jack didn't answer right away. She continued, "I ain't just a guest anymore. We both know that. But I can't stay here like I'm just a shadow either." "You ain't," he said flatly. "I know. But I need to know I belong." "You do." "I need more than a place to sleep, Jack. More than shared coffee and warm hands at night." He didn't flinch. "You want a promise. I want a future." He leaned forward. "You think I'd let someone touch what's mine if I didn't mean to keep her?" Her breath hitched. "I never asked to be kept," she said. "I didn't mean owned," he replied. "I meant chosen." The room grew still. She whispered, "I've never been that before. You are now." She stepped closer. Standing over his chair, she said, "Then say it." His eyes locked on hers. "I want you here, with me. Not just now, not just through the winter. I want to build something, and I want you in it." She exhaled like she'd held her breath for years, then bent and kissed him full, not pulling away. Later that day, she fed her old dress into the stove and lit the match herself. Jack didn't ask why. She watched every seam, every thread burn. When it was gone, she turned to him. "That life's over." He nodded. Because now they had one just beginning. The first time they rode into Broken Spur together, the snow had melted into brown slush, and the wagon wheels sank into the softened road. It was near spring, still cold, but the bite had gone out of the air. Jack Hollister sat on the wagon bench, one hand loose on the reins, his coat open at the chest. Beside him, Clara May Whitlow rode, wrapped in his old blanket, her hair tied back with a strip of linen, her body carrying a quiet steadiness. She wore one of his shirts, this one cinched at the waist with an old saddle strap. It fit better than the others, hugging her curves in a way that made heads turn as they passed the edge of the livery. The torn prairie dress was gone, burned to ash with the winter. Neither of them spoke on the way in. They didn't need to. Clara May's fingers gripped the edge of the seat, cold but steady as the weathered buildings of Broken Spur came into view, a place that had once spat her out not so long ago. Jack glanced sideways. "We don't have to go in." "I do," she said, without looking at him. They stopped at the general store, the same place he'd bought mule grain weeks ago, the same day he'd found her abandoned at the depot, while no one else had lifted a hand. Inside, the old clock still ticked behind the counter. Grover, thin and bony, sat there, with the same pinched face and cracked spectacles. Clara May stepped down first. Jack followed half a step behind. They walked in together, boots thumping against the planks. The room hushed. A woman froze with a basket halfway lifted. A man near the flour barrels narrowed his eyes. Grover said nothing, just watched. Clara May's chin rose a notch. She didn't smile, didn't shrink, just moved through the store, steady choosing what they needed: soap, salt, a tin of coffee. She carried the basket. Jack walked beside her. Didn't reckon she'd show her face again, the man near the flour muttered, not loud, but enough to carry. Jack turned his head, his jaw tight. The man was square-built, middle-aged, the kind of face that had never seen much work but carried entitlement anyway. "She's worth more than you," Jack said, flatly. No anger, just fact. The words landed harder for it. The man blinked silent. Clara May kept moving. At the counter, Grover cleared his throat. "Need anything else?" Jack shook his head. Grover bagged the goods, still refusing to meet Clara May's eye. On the porch, sunlight cut sharp across the boards. She paused. "That used to ruin me," she said quietly. "Being looked at like that. Talked over. Talked about." Jack adjusted the strap on the sack. "Don't go back in if you don't want to." "No. I'll go in again. And again. Till I stop caring." He studied her a moment. "You're not what they said." "I know," she answered. "But I needed someone else to say it first." They loaded the wagon in silence. When he tied the last sack, she turned. "I've been thinking again." He smirked. "Dangerous. I want to stay." "You are." "I mean stay," she pressed. "Not just in your bed, in your life," he stilled. "I want to be more than the woman you saved," she said. "I want to build something here with you, something no one can take." He stepped closer, boots crunching in the slush, his hand finding hers. Her skin was cold, but her grip steady. "You already are." They rode home slow, the wagon creaking over thawing earth. Near the cabin, Jack stopped where the fence curved around a patch of flat ground. He pointed. "Used to be a garden there, before the fire. Ma grew beans, tomatoes, herbs, tied 'em with twine to dry by the stove." Clara May studied the ground. "You want to plant again? I think we could." She smiled. That night they sat by the fire as always, but something different had settled between them. A belonging that didn't need to be spoken, to be real. She reached for his hand, and he laced their fingers. That was enough. Spring came late. Snow gave way to wet soil and hard sun. The wind turned restless. Jack mended the southern pasture fence, while Clara May dug trenches in the garden where his mother once worked. Her boots caked in mud sleeves, rolled high hair tied back with twine. She moved, steady sweat glistening on her neck, his shirt damp at the chest. She didn't ask for help, and he didn't offer. They worked in rhythm, each tending what needed doing. They lived in the same space now, though nothing formal had been said. That morning, as she wiped her brow, she called across the garden, "You still want to do this alone?" He set down his hammer, stood tall. "I haven't been alone in months. I mean for good," she said. "I don't want to be a visitor. I don't want to be something passing through." "You aren't. Then make it real. Say it." Jack crossed the garden dirt, still on his hands. Her face flushed from sun. He cupped her jaw. "I want you to stay in this house, in this life with me, as my wife." Her breath caught. "No preacher, no papers. Just us," he said. "I ain't much for speeches." "Good," she answered. "Me neither." That evening, Clara May stood barefoot in the doorway, the sun dipping behind the trees, wind brushing the hem of his old shirt. She wore thighs still dusted with soil. Her face was freshly washed hair damp, a cup of coffee in her hands. Jack came up behind, slipped an arm around her waist, kissed the back of her neck. She leaned into him. "You think they'll stop talking?" she asked softly. He shook his head against her skin. "Doesn't matter." "No," she whispered. She smiled. "It doesn't." Later that week, they rode into Broken Spur together again. This time, Clara May Whitlow wore her own boots and a skirt she'd sewn herself from old flour sacks. Her head stayed low at first, hair clean and loose across her shoulders. But when they stepped into the store and the stairs began again, Clara May lifted her chin. Her arm was looped through Jack Hollister's. When Grover glanced up from the clock behind the counter and asked if they needed anything else, Jack answered steady. "Yeah, we'll be needing a cradle." The room went still. Clara May didn't blink, only looked forward and gave the slightest nod. Back at the cabin, they built it together. Jack carved the rails with his knife, and Clara May sanded the edges smooth. When it was finished, she tied a ribbon from an old hair wrap across the front slat. One evening, while sweeping the porch, Clara May found the coat Jack had wrapped around her that first night, folded neat in a trunk. She picked it up, held it for a long time, then carried it inside. Sitting by the fire, she laid it across his lap. "I want to keep this," she said. "Not because I'm cold anymore, but to remember what it felt like to be seen for the first time." Jack nodded slowly, fingers brushing the worn fabric. "I didn't think I'd get to live like this," she whispered. "You weren't given anything," he replied. "You stayed. You made it." They sat quiet after that, watching the fire. The cabin was still small. The floor still creaked, the walls still rough. But it no longer felt empty. Its warmth came from more than wood on the hearth. By summer, beans were pushing up in the garden, hens were laying regular, and the woman once left to freeze beneath a depot awning was now the heart of this home. Jack built a second chair for the porch, not because she asked, but because she deserved one that was hers. And Clara May stayed, not out of need, not because she had nowhere else to go. She stayed because at last someone had given her a place worth staying in. They never spoke of Reverend Silas Boone again, or the $5 she was once said to be worth. They didn't need to. Jack hadn't bought her, and she hadn't bargained herself away. She chose him. And he, quiet, steady, unyielding, chose her right back. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.